Okay, well, let's go ahead and kick things off. Thank you, everybody, for making the time to be with us today. This session will be recorded, and we can distribute that to everyone to use as you see fit. I'm Chris Etheredge with Robocorp. I'm privileged to be joined by Paul and Ben from Emerson. They'll tell you more about their roles as we go through the presentation today, but this is all about understanding Emerson's journey to intelligent automation and how it all got started. Paul and Ben were at the epicenter of automation kicking off within Emerson and their company. And I think, they were one of the first, large industrial companies really to get into automation. I think I remember Paul telling me a story about when they were first evaluating vendors, all the reference calls were with banks and financial institutions, et cetera, that were early adopters. And so they were very much on the forefront in the industrial sector of leveraging automation and have a great story to tell. And obviously they'll talk about, why they decided to adopt Robocorp's platform and, made that choice to migrate a lot of their automations, build net new ones, et cetera. And they'll talk about the lessons they've learned, the value that they've driven, and share with you, kind of what they see as kind of this journey and the results of it. So with that, I'll cover just one slide for those of you that may not be overly familiar with Robocorp and what we're doing in the market and why we're working with large organizations, as well as small ones really around the world on their automation journey. It really boils down to, making new things possible in the automation world, right? And we do that with a combination of things, right? First and foremost, we're leveraging very powerful open source ecosystems to give our customers and partners the ability to build bots in a more robust and modern way. It's Python based at its core, so we're leveraging a vibrant ecosystem of innovation out there that's really unparalleled. But we layer abstraction on top of it to make it accessible to non-Python developers. And what this ultimately gives our customers is the ability to automate at all levels of the stack against the target systems that they're looking to automate, right? So we support, traditional RPA and the, emulate a process as a human would against the user interface, but we also make it easy to go deeper into the stack, go against APIs, go down to the data layer, right? So you can build automations that are ultimately more robust and more resilient and often run a lot faster than what's been possible on previous platforms. We couple that with a cloud-native orchestration solution that we built from the ground up in the cloud that we provide as SaaS to our clients, that gives them a lot of capability and flexibility, because the bots themselves can run fully in the cloud, they can run fully on-premise, or even a combination of the two, depending on your use case, while having full control over data movement and data privacy. It's SOC 2, Type 2 compliant, HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant. It's allowed us to do business with not only companies like Emerson in the industrial space, but highly regulated banks and healthcare organizations as well. It's a very modern security profile. And because we're Python based, it runs on any of the major OSs natively. And then, we're not just disrupting on the technical side. We introduce pure consumption-based pricing. So number one, leveraging open source technologies, you're able to build bots freely and retain the IP ownership of everything that you build, right? There's no lock-in to us whatsoever. We only monetize when bots are being orchestrated through our platform, but there's no concept of developer licenses, orchestrator licenses, or bot runner licenses. It's purely usage-based. So that allows clients like Emerson to be able to scale up and down their automations on demand and only pay for the time that those automations are actually running. It also allows you to scale out so that I can architect an automation for maximum efficiency rather than being constrained by your vendor's licensing model. And I think Emerson has really taken advantage of that for some of their high volume mission critical workloads, and we'll share some of that with you today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who will talk to you a little bit about Emerson's, automation journey and kind of why they got into a partnership with Robocorp. And then Ben will go into more detail about how they're using the platform and the lessons that they've learned. We will have opportunity for Q&A at the end through the chat, and we'll look forward to hearing your questions, and we'll go from there. All right. So with that, let me stop share and turn it over to Paul.
Yeah, hey, great, Chris. Thanks for the introduction. I am going to share a quick slide, and then I'll give a general introduction to Emerson, And then Ben and I can introduce ourselves. So let me see if I can get this right quick. You're seeing my desktop, I believe, right?
Nothing, there it is. Yeah,
Okay, so you can see this slide up here. Yep.
okay, got it.
So here's a quick introduction about Emerson. So we're a industrial software company, about 17 billion in sales, global reach, global footprint. And you can think about us, if I start here at the bottom, we have intelligent field devices. So we have a lot of devices such as valves, measuring devices that go into industrial locations, such as energy, life sciences, food and beverage, et cetera, that are really the kind of the muscle, if you will, that operate the plants on a daily basis. And then we have through a secure connected layer, we have software platforms that take that data from those intelligent devices and make it useful, insightful, right? So think about like predictive analytics, predictive maintenance, a big control room within a plant. And then on top of that, there's services that we offer that help keep that whole life cycle up and running. One of the use cases I like to share with everyone with Emerson, just because it's one of those names that it's everywhere, but you don't always realize it because it's a lot of times behind the scenes and further upstream. But when you think about the COVID vaccines, all the major vaccines, so Moderna, Pfizer, et cetera, they're all manufactured on the Emerson software platform. So clearly, life critical type operations. In terms of myself, so I lead our global financial services team, and so you can think about that as kind of shared services for finance. We have three main locations: one in Manila, one in Costa Rica, one in Romania. I've been doing this for about 3 years, and before that, with Ben, helped launch and lead our intelligent automation team across Emerson. And we'll get into this during the discussion, I'm sure, but as we look forward, especially in the global business service space, automation is a key part. And so we really have a great partnership with Robocorp. They've helped us along a lot over the last couple of years, and we see this as an area that has a lot of room to grow within our organization. So with that, maybe Ben, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm Ben Griffith. I'm the Director of Intelligent Automation. I work for Paul within the shared service space. And really, my team's mission is really to help financial services as they take in, disparate processes across the company and help standardize and automate those to be as efficient as they can. And obviously we use tools such as RPA, and specifically open source RPA with Robocorp to help achieve that mission. So glad to be on. Maybe Paul, I have a couple slides, but I think mainly what I think we want to talk about is just our automation journey, kind of where we started, several years ago, and how we ended up to where we are today. So before I share, I'll just talk openly about, but we started, I guess, Paul, like maybe 4 or 5, wow, it's hard to say, like maybe 4 years ago, and 4 or 5 years ago, in terms of when we started to invest in RPA for Emerson. So Paul and I both actually started out in internal audit, and we were looking for ways to make everything around the audit process more efficient. And Paul is very good at being at the tip of the spear of various technologies and getting in front of what's, sort of the trends related to technologies. And RPA was, I don't say new at the time, but certainly from an industrial company, it was a relatively new concept at that time, around 2017, 18. And basically, through sort of organic growth within the audit department, we invested in a Gen1 RPA solution, and really got the backing of upper management in Emerson, and we were able to really help scale that across Emerson from around 2018 through 2020 into the COVID years. And we eventually became a standalone intelligent automation department within Emerson. And we sort of were like the center of excellence for best practices for RPA. We had a core team of developers with experienced developers who would develop core objects that could then be distributed across the company and used within automations within the company using one of the big three tools, Gen1 RPA tools. And that was over the course of 3 years. I mean, this was a very good problem that we had. We scaled significantly to where we got to the point in around 2020 or so where we were running into some capacity constraint issues with our tools. And I think one of the challenges we were seeing around then is, we invested in a nice orchestration tool to help us get the most out of our bot licenses that we had. But we were still running into the same issues over and over again, which is everyone wanting to run their bots at the same time and running into just capacity constraint issues. And then there's really we got some economies of scale with having a strong orchestration tool that could look at, what bots have priority, but we were running into issues where certain key bots were just cannibalizing everything, and other bots were having to wait in line, and it was turning up into an issue with clients and within the company, and they were starting to sort of question the value of RPA if the bots weren't able to run. So we got to this point where we had to make some decisions about our future with RPA, because in order to meet the demands of what we were currently running, we would have really had to scale up our license base and our hardware base, because everything we were doing, most of the RPA we do is very much on premise. So we had on-premise hardware, on-premise app servers, on-premise database, everything about even our orchestration tools on premise. So we had to make some decisions. Do we scale up to where we can meet the demand, or do we look at other options and not get locked into current vendor? Because we were getting to the point where we were kind of at that crossroads. It's like, we either need to go all in with this or think about how we can change and become more nimble. So we decided around 2021, I guess, to start investigating some of the open source options. And this was really driven by, again, Paul, but then also our developers, who are, I would say, most of the developers we have have a computer science background and understand Python and scripting languages. And honestly, for them, like, using drag and drop type RPA tools was almost a bit constrictive for them. Like, they feel more comfortable working in tools that are more Python based. So we started to evaluate the options around that time. And, this was way before, I would say, the Gen 1s were even evaluating things like consumption-based pricing and that sort of thing. So we found Robocorp, and Robocorp offered all the things back then that Chris mentioned today, and it seemed like a really good potential fit for us. We felt like the risk of going down the path with them was fairly low, given the fact that it was all open source. And if nothing else, we could, if it didn't go well, we could keep our Gen 1 tool, but maybe get some of those bigger consumers off of the Gen 1 and into something more open source. But after working with Robocorp for a while, we really had, we developed a really good relationship with them, and they've been extremely helpful with helping us do through our journey through open source. And now we're really in the process of evaluating all the bots we have within Emerson and moving the ones over to Robocorp as the platform where it makes sense. Some of them, might not make the journey, because when you reevaluate processes, you might realize that maybe they should be done in a different way. Maybe there's an API for that bot now, or maybe it really should never have been developed in the first place. So it's all part of the journey. But Robocorp's been extremely helpful with us and helping us get to that point. So we've made really good progress over the past couple of years, and we can talk a little bit about that success.
Yeah, I would say, Ben, if I to just jump in real quick,
Yeah.
right? I would say, underline everything you just said. And if I go back even to when we first started with RPA, right? The notion was, hey, anybody can build a bot, right? And we went through a heavy exercise throughout the org to get as many people up and running, building bots. And I think what we learned is that, there's a lot of people that can learn to do this. I think, like anything, like if you want to do it, you can learn it. I don't think it's like only select people that have some innate skill set and know how to do it. But what we learned, we must have went through, I forget how many workshops, but a half a dozen at least around the org. And there'd be like 30, 40 people in each workshop. And everyone would be really excited during the workshop. And then a week later, it would be like crickets, right? Or you get a couple that come out and start building bots, and they're just not production ready, or they're not, they never make it actually to be completed. And so that was also part of, as we went through the analysis, okay, what's the, is there a better solution out there? And you kind of already hit on this. The ones that were really building the production bots were the ones that either really dove in and took the training and really committed themselves, or they already had some experience in software development. And when you think about those types of users, it's not like what you mentioned, it's not the drag and drop type tools. It's the more modern cloud-based solutions that interact with like GitHub or something like that, right? And that's really was at the core of Robo. So that was a key benefit there. And then just to highlight again, and Chris mentioned this and Ben did too, from the consumption base, right? It's like you always have to buy, when you're in the license model, you always have to buy enough license to your peak demand. And so in the finance world, in the accounting world specifically, you have a very peak at the end of the month. And then it kind of in the middle of the month, it drags down. And then you have another peak, and then in the following month and so on, right? And so with the license model, we would have, to Ben's point earlier, we'd have a lot of times where everyone needs to run something, and then we'd have capacity next week. And moving to the consumption based was really interesting to us, to be able to manage through that. And then the infrastructure to maintain the Gen1 just started growing and growing and growing. For every license we created, we had to get another server, another test environment, another prod environment. And I know that there's ways to bundle that, but generally the infrastructure would grow every time you added a license, and then the maintenance of that infrastructure. And so moving to the cloud-based solution was definitely a good, it was something that we were interested to get away from managing the day-to-day infrastructure on all those. And then also one more thing, and then kick it over back to you, Ben. When we were looking at this, right, we talked to other market leaders, and at the time, and I guess this was like 2017-ish, give or take, right? It was, look, there's going to be this area will grow fast. And when you look at the direction it's going into AI and ML type capabilities of how that all merges together. And if you're going to be in AI and ML, you really want to be Python based. And so that was also something that boded well as we started looking through Robocorp, is that it's Python based. And again, if you want to learn the skill, if you have the right skill sets, you can dive into, I guess, line by line code if you want to. But I would say using the robot framework and having access to all these open source libraries, for me, who's someone who's not a developer, but maybe you can kind of think about it as almost like a super user. Like I can get through some, I don't know, entry level type, I guess, coding type things. But the framework in the libraries made it really easy because it's almost more, I call it like a scripting tool. So you didn't have to know like how to build things from Python at a raw level. What you could do is use these libraries where you just insert maybe the keywords or the actions you want to do, and behind the scenes, it does kind of all the detailed code for you. I mean, not for you, it's already built in, right? It's kind of like an Excel formula where I don't need to code how the sum function works, but I can call the sum function and put in my parameters, and I know I'm going to get the right result. So that was really helpful and interesting. And I would say it also opened up my world as we go forward into open source libraries. And when you think about things like, one of the challenges with Gen1 is that everyone, when I talk to other companies, other colleagues and peers at other companies, we're kind of all trying to do the same thing, right? We're automating things in Excel, we're automating things in Oracle, we're automating things in SAP, HFM, like a lot of the same enterprise systems, but everyone's doing it on their own. And there wasn't a lot of sharing of those resources. When you get into open source world, right? I mean, that stuff's out there available. You got a community that supports it. And so it just opens up all these capabilities that you don't have to do yourselves, that you can leverage, right? And so that was really appealing to us too, and something that I frankly, I generally knew that was out there and how it worked, but didn't have a full appreciation for it. And now I think it's definitely the better way to go, is something that's tied into an open source community.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'm gonna share. I do have a slide. I just want to a couple slides just to kind of highlight some of our things, some of our decisions, and some of the things we saw for benefits. And we've touched on a lot of these. And I just want to show just on the slide what we see as the benefits over the Gen1. And then briefly talk about some of the target applications in the libraries we use. And then the next slide, I'm going to show an example of how we actually use those at a very high level. So I'm trying not to rehash too much, but having all the controller room and orchestration in the cloud is extremely useful for us and helpful. Like I said before, our prior one was very much on premise, so we had to maintain hardware and stuff for the actual orchestration. Using GitHub and tools like Visual Studio Code that are just out there, I mean, is extremely helpful as well. So basically, we're not using proprietary anything to develop the bots, right? We're using, it's all free open source tools that anyone can use and download. And that's really important, right? So we're not at the mercy of even Robocorp to develop this stuff. But it's been really nice. And yeah, obviously portability, knowing that we have that option, in our hip pocket is always good. We're not vendor locked necessarily. Obviously we wouldn't change anything because Robocorp's been great, but that is definitely was one of the big decisions, one of the defining keys for us when making this choice. And then I would say the consumption based, you know, I don't want to caveat it, but like, obviously what's nice is we can use the cloud, we can run headless in the cloud when we need to, and just take full advantage of the platform and the microservices that they offer. If we need to run something on premise, because it's maybe a legacy system that has to be run on premise, we have the ability now to basically run as many bot runners as we can on one server until obviously that server hits its, you know, CPU peak. But with Gen 1, that was very much not an option. We had to have servers for like every single bot runner. So now we can scale up. So we have very limited servers now. I think we have like 5 or so. And with those 5, we can run a significant number of bot runners at one time to get the jobs done that we need to on certainly more legacy fat client type applications that we have, like Oracle EBS or Bond. You know, we're able to do that with much less hardware than we had to before. And then if something can be run in the cloud, we run it in the cloud, and we don't have to worry about hardware for that, and we can rely on the servers that Robocorp maintains in the cloud. So that's really nice. So that was actually a pretty huge that was a huge win for us, for sure. And a bit of a coup, I would say, just by the amount of reduction in hardware that we have. And it's been, you know, as we work towards the end of getting off Gen 1, it'll certainly be less of a burden on our infrastructure team to maintain the servers. And then a couple more other things I'd like to highlight. You know, you can also run attended bots very easily and in a much more efficient way. So generally speaking, if you're running a Gen 1 bot attended, you pretty much have to have it surfaced on your screen at all times, versus because of the nature of the bots and how they run, most bots we can, if we have to run an assistant, it can run in the background or on a VM, but the VM doesn't have to be surfaced on your, you know, visually displaying on your screen at the time. So that's nice. We have some bots that actually do that because you know, it has some PII data bots that HR runs. They don't want to, they really want to have that controlled to where they don't run in the cloud at all. So we have that ability to run those as assistants for them. And then finally, we don't have the upgrade risk. I would say one of the biggest pain points with Gen 1 was having to upgrade, and that sort of goes away. So when you upgrade, it also means that you need to upgrade your extensions, and upgrading extensions, for example, might create an issue for bots that were running perfectly fine in a previous version of a bot software, and now they don't. So I think every time we upgraded before, it was a huge issue. So now with using things like GitHub, we upgrade our libraries a lot in our templates, but you're not forced to have to use it. If your bot's running fine on a previous version, you're not forced to have to change to the new version of the template. If you don't want to, you can certainly do that and get the benefits, but you could always keep if it's breaking and you don't know why, you can always revert back to what you know works. So that's been really nice. And just, you know, using that code versioning tool like GitHub really helps with that. Let's see, a couple other things I want to touch on is just maybe a little bit on talent ramp up. So Paul alluded to this, and it rings true. You know, a lot of the developers already had like a development background, and for them, you know, I would say upskilling to using something like this was they were excited about it, and they were, you know, very eager to do it. For those who were more citizen developers, I would say the learning curve is similar to is similar to learning a Gen 1 tool, because those can be fairly intimidating as well to learn. So it's just for them, I think it's been a bit of a mindset shift, because it is quite a bit different in terms of the look and feel. But from what we've experienced, it is a very achievable goal, assuming you're motivated and are willing to do the work and do the trainings and actually get in and have the right attitude about it. There's no reason why you can't make the switch from being, a developer for a Gen 1 tool and then making that switch. Most everyone's been successful who's done it so far. And then, like Paul said, you're not building the engine from scratch most of the time. You sort of changing the oil and, changing the brake pads and things. Like, stuff's built. As we build bots, all that information we put back into our templates so that we have reusable objects and codes and code code sections within our templates that can then be used. So if we go through the process of locating an Oracle form, that form gets pushed back into our template, and then the next person who has to do an automation with that form doesn't have to relocate all the fields on that. They can just basically plug and play. So that's really nice, a nice feature as well. And that's really always how we've approached automations, even back when we first started, was reusable objects as much as possible so that we have consistent bot processes across the enterprise. Other things I want to, yeah, go ahead.
Or if I can jump in, there's a couple of questions come up around the actual migration from Gen 1, Gen 2 to Robo.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe talk about my general thoughts was like there was a mind switch, of course, and it did take an effort to take some of those and move them in. And this also gets to another question that was around like determining what processes are really good for automation. Some may not be good for bot automation, right? And I would say with the Gen 1, as we launched it, we didn't know as much at the time, of course. But we definitely had some stuff in there that really, as we moved to Robo, that was like, and you mentioned this earlier, Ben, that are like, that's not either, it's no longer needed, or maybe it was never really all that necessary from the beginning. And so as we are in Robo now, we definitely have a process. It's kind of part of our continuous improvement process. That's where a lot of the use cases come from, is out of the continuous improvement team that vet that stuff out ahead of time and then give it to the automation team that does it in Robo.
Yeah.
Back to the kind of the migration. I mean, maybe talk about that. I mean, there definitely was an effort in the first couple of ones, like anything, maybe took a little bit longer, but I think once a couple of the migrations were made.
It was interesting because you would start small, and
right.
We started big because we had an actual problem where certain bots were just kind of cannibalizing cannibalizing everything. So we got to get these off now as soon as we can into open source. So we actually started big. We started with the big ones, and I would say we worked with, at the time, Climate Technologies at the time, and I think if you have the right motivation to do it, you'll be able to do it quickly. If you're sort of on the fence about whether you should do it or not, like you might have more of a struggle. But and certainly with, we started out with our basic top developers, the most knowledgeable technical developers doing the migrations, and that really helped, because once you get the things over, now you're building a library of things that can be reused. I would say is the first thing. Start with your top developers when doing this, and then as you start to build the reusable libraries and things, then some of the more citizen developers or those who aren't quite as technical can come in and not have to build the stuff from scratch as much, and they can just sort of plug and play with what's been built already. And we also worked with Robocorp to help. They helped us, and we worked with them to create some open source libraries for Java Access Bridge, which is basically how you would interact with Oracle EBS. So that now is a library that's out there that Robocorp provides. And another method we did was not, we looked at it bot by bot, but we also looked at it more holistically, like what are the top, what are the top forms that are used in Oracle, for example. Let's build those out in chunks, even though we don't necessarily have the bot ready to go. We know we're going to eventually need that form, right? So let's actually develop just that form. Let's locate that form, get it ready to go, and have it ready to be used. So that could be another approach you take. Start with a process and do it process by process, or look at your universe of bots and see what are the most commonly used tools, what are the most commonly used forms or whatever. Build those in a modular way, and then have them be ready when you're building out the process. Let's see. The other nice thing, especially for upskilling, in VS Code, you also have tools like Copilot, and obviously now ChatGPT, but those really do make, those are game changers, and Copilot is not necessarily new, but that can really help you get over a mountain of complexity, or if you're stuck on something, you get the answer pretty fast, right? So, Copilot's nice if you're like, I need to do this calculation. I need this number to get to four significant decimals, and you can go within VS Code, type in Copilot and be like, how do I round this number to 4 significant decimals? And it would basically give you the modulo formula that you'll need to do that. So that's really nice, a nice feature as well, that I'm sure everyone in the world is trying to get implemented as soon as they can. So that, yeah, I would say now also the excuses for not, the sort of excuses for not necessarily for being intimidated by something like Python, I think, are going down, right? So, and also we haven't had to do this yet, but Python developers, they're not like, I think it's certainly around the world, if you had to hire people or even work with third parties, it's a fairly ubiquitous skill now, I would say, since it's so popular. Okay, we have time. We have some time. Okay, so maybe a little bit. Maybe I could show just an example of how we use Robocorp with some of the libraries, and then give you an idea of how within financial services we do intelligent automation, how we think of it. So here's an example of a bot, probably a common bot you would do within the accounting process. So basically the preparation, submission and approval, and posting of a journal entry. So at month end, basically this process times, 100, multiple hundreds of times would be something that we would do as part of intelligent automation. So in this situation, it involves multiple tools, because often within an accounting process, because of certain controls that have to be met, it's very often a human in the loop sort of situation where you have automation, and then you have humans interact with the data or the information when needed. And for control purposes, for a journal entry, you need a person to manually actually set that they approve it. So oftentimes we use automation very much hand in hand with low code tools like Power Apps or Power Platform in general. to help us facilitate the automation of, processes from beginning to end. So for a journal entry, for example, what we'll do is there'll be a triggering event for a journal entry. Like there's a third, like let's say one of the bots we do is a freight journal entry. So there is a third-party web application that gives you that presents the freight detail for the month. And what the bot does, and we use Robocorp for this, the platform, but then also the Selenium library to basically go to the website. We use Selenium to get the data from the website, and then on top of that we use MS Graph with it to get it into SharePoint and interact with it in SharePoint. So those are all API libraries that are available open source that you can bring in to the environment. And then that's just the raw data. Now that data has to be transformed into a journal entry. It has to go from the third party and then married together with the Emerson sort of reporting structure, right? So that's where we use a tool like Pandas to do the data transformation of the raw data, map it to how it should be mapped for reporting purposes, group together into a journal entry, the debits and the credits. And then we communicate that to the actual quote unquote preparer who had the entry basically prepared for them. They review it, just make sure that everything ties, and they'll use Power Apps to basically get the entry into a spot that has the correct metadata that the approver would need to see in order to approve it. And then there's a workflow element there where we'll use Power Automate Cloud. I want to emphasize cloud to then produce, kick off a workflow to the reviewer, who then also uses Power Apps to evidence their review. And by using those tools, we enforce it, we're taking out any sort of free text or anything. It's all very much forcing the metadata into a common form, such that we have a nice queue of information for the bot to then take and actually process. So once that's done, the bot using MS Graph again, so Robocorp, and we use the MS Graph API, will then upload the entry, because it's in Oracle, you can use an Excel template and then upload it. There's an add-in within Excel that you can help you upload it to Oracle, which is a lot better than going line by line. But you still need the bot to do that because it is a custom plugin. You have to use, you can't do it through purely the back end. So the bot will upload the entry to Oracle, EBS, and then the bot will actually go into Oracle Forms and post the entry. They already have evidence of the approval. One of the things we don't necessarily use all our systems to their full extent. So we don't use the inherent workflow functionality in our ERP systems, for example. So this helps us work through some of those limitations and efficiently get the journal entries posted. And there are a lot of them. So that's just an example of how it all comes together certainly within our department, and many other examples like this. So I thought I'd highlight that as an example of how we work with Robocorp, some of the libraries that are out there, and some other tools to help us as well. I will say that the Robocorp also developed a web hook that can be used within Power Automate, so you can trigger bots. They have the API out there where you can based on a trigger, you can then pass information back into Robocorp or just kick off the bot process within Robocorp. Also, Robocorp makes it pretty easy. Each bot process has like an email. You can turn this on, but like it'll have like an email address associated with it. And technically, if you send an email to that email address, it will kick off the bot, right? So that's a very straightforward way. If you just wanted some sort of trigger, like a certain file is sent from a certain email address, like that's a very easy Power Automate trigger that could then kick off a bot process to then go to that, find that email with the attachment, and then do the necessary automation with it. So anything else? I'm trying to make sure I cover everything. I don't know, Paul, if you wanted to talk about some of the more.
Yeah, when you think about where this is all going, right? I mean, so first of all, if you just kind of the example Ben showed, when I think about global business services, and it's really the back office, right, of large organizations, you're talking 5,000-10,000 plus people in these organizations, and they're doing a lot of these tasks manually. And so being able to use a tool like Robo and I know automation is a big space, right? And so here we use multiple kind of solutions to be able to solve the whole process. And I just think there's much more opportunity to do this as we go forward. And you know, like generative AI, like Chat GPT, whatever, right? It's kind of front of mind of everyone right now, or at least the front of headlines. And I saw I think Goldman had a analysis that came out, which I think was very interesting, kind of spot on to what we've seen before in terms of other technologies that come out, right? Which says like something like 2/3 of all jobs will be impacted by generative AI, but it'll actually probably only displace about 10%, because a lot of the things that you'll use generative AI for will complement what you do today. Copilot's a good example of that, Ben mentioned, right? And so as you are, whether it be Visual Studio, or I know Copilot will become more available through the Office applications, it'll really help you do your job more efficient. And so that, which helps with attrition, which helps with a lot of different things, right? And so I think really knowing how to use these tools will help separate you from those that don't, essentially. And when I think about using generative AI within our business processes, you could brainstorm all day about this, right? And we could have some pretty interesting solutions or potentials. But an area that I think that we really want to kind of test generative AI with, and talk to the Robo team about this, and they're interested in helping us as well, are some of those interaction points, especially when you think about it's a lot of the same interaction. So something maybe as simple as just reaching out to customers and confirming when payments can be made, or if you have a question about remittance information. So some of those things that are just kind of daily, but remedial, I guess. Maybe there's a way to insert some generative AI to be able to pull that information out into a structured format, and then use a tool like Robo to then take that structured information and go put it into the source ERP. And then also when you think about that stuff, when we're being a global organization, we deal with a lot of different languages. And so trying to maintain staff around the world that can support us with all those different languages is a challenge. And again, interjecting generative AI into the process will definitely help. But then we need to take that information and do something with it. And that's the piece that Robo can definitely help us with. And so I think a lot of opportunity, a lot of exciting things more to come in this. And I do think, like we mentioned in the beginning, this stuff kind of all merges together, and that's really the path that's going on. And being able to have a platform that we can reach into all these different areas to solve a solution has been really, really beneficial and really helpful. I know there was a question in the Q&A about the way we're structured from a COE perspective. And so we have Ben leads our automation COE. And so what's in there is what you would imagine, right? It's some key developers. It's a administrator that's separate from the developers, that helps administer the platform, move things into production, etc. Uh, what was in there also, I think the question specifically was bot controller. I don't think in Gen 1, bot controller was really important because it's really about trying to manage the volume and making sure everything kicked off and making sure if it had an error, it gets resolved, or it's not stalling it's not locking down a machine essentially. With Robo, we just don't have that. That's not as much of a concern. As Ben mentioned earlier, we have one server, for example, that can run 40 processes at one time, right? And if one thread, one session becomes idle or errors out, it doesn't kill everything else. And so that's just not as an important role.
Yeah, I would say too that we are better able to isolate the workspaces by a logical, in a logical way. It's just it's really easy to do in Robocorp. So we do want to, I would say we're not a pure COE as much as like an alliance of developers. And, you know, I'd say our team sort of does seem, we do sort of help with the vision and direction, but then we do very much have developers within the business that we give the responsibility to know what they're doing and do their own development. And then, you know, my team could do code reviews and things, but ultimately, if they're in their own workspace, they can do things as they would like. But we do have a centralized like overall management of the environment. Like, yeah, like you said, that is through IT, our IT department. They are definitely separate. It's not, so it actually used to be more of like a hub and spoke, where our department would deliver bots to other parts of the business, like procurement or whatever, supply chain. We became much more, with our shared service initiative, became much more hyper focused in finance. And then, but it was also at the same time that the rest of the company was getting mature into RPA. So we felt the time was right for almost, and it's almost backwards, but not really. Like we had enough developers throughout the business that they could manage their own bots fairly well, we thought. So that's how it's gone for us. It's not necessarily the pure playbook of how you would necessarily do it, but I think in our case, it made a lot of sense.
Okay, so Chris, I don't know if there's anything else you want us to cover, any questions?
There's a question in the chat there, Paul, that just asked about any benefits you've realized on bot failure, bugs, et cetera, after you migrated over. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's obviously error handling is generally much easier. I wish we have an old slide. I don't have it with me, but it basically demonstrates like error handling in our prior tool and how complicated it was to put the error handling steps in, versus in Python robot framework, it basically inherently had error handling built in to it. So I would say part of the thing, like a lot of times when we think of bugs, sometimes it's that the process maybe is bad, or it just changes a lot, or they didn't have the proper error handling, or oftentimes it's not even a process issue at all, it's an infrastructure issue. So having a ton of servers just inherently made it to where it seemed like things were really buggy, but it could have been that having a very static infrastructure environment is incredibly important. And if some server got through your security exception and there was a new firewall policy put in place, you might think that's a bug with your bot, but really it's an infrastructure issue. Those were by far the most issues we had before. And with less infrastructure, we're able to get on top of those a lot faster. But then, yeah, I mean, you still need to be very diligent about error handling, and but it's a lot easier to do error handling within the framework, I would say. Also, when you're using tools like Java Access Bridge, Selenium, you don't run into the same issues you would if you're using the out-of-the-box extensions that they have for Chrome, for example, for some of the Gen 1 solutions. So, and then if something does seriously break and you need to look at it, I mean, there are forums out there. So if Selenium is acting up, then there's Selenium forums you can go in and certainly Robocorp's on it too, because it's having something like Selenium work is incredibly important for Robocorp for their purposes. So they have their developers tackling these things as well. If something's up with the library, they're looking into it.
Awesome. Well, if anybody else, we've got a few minutes left. If anyone has additional questions, they'd like to pop into the chat. Now's a good time to do it. You know, I think we covered a lot of ground here, guys, and thank you for going to the level of detail that you did. You know, I think the open source comments, right? You know, and you talk about the benefit that Emerson gets from that. We benefit too, right? And therefore the broader community benefits. I think about that Java Access Bridge.
Yeah.
When we first started talking to you guys, you know, our engineers raised their hand and said, yeah, nobody's raising their hand to go jump into Java Access Bridge and start extending it. We needed a customer to help us understand what's needed. What did you need in that library from a bot function standpoint? And I think, you know, your team was a big part in making that library what it is today, and it continues to grow as new use cases and patterns emerge, right? So I think that's valuable contribution that Emerson's made.
That was critical because that was our first. We're like, look, if you can't do this, it's not going to work at all. And we're like,
Right.
We're frankly skeptical. We're like, okay, are they really going to be able to do this? And then you did it, it worked. And to Ben's point earlier, it was more stable than what we've seen in our other solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tend to hear that a lot, but that's a good thing. So thank you guys. We benefit from the relationship just as much as you guys do on the other side of this. So that's been great. You know, one of the other things I'll mention, there's a lot of questions around change management and training resources. I thought you guys took an interesting approach. You know, obviously the developers ramped up very fast. They were looking for something that was more programmable, you know, the guys down in Costa Rica and around the world. But there were others, right, that were, you know, just more trained on Gen 1 and low code drag and drop, never been in an IDE before. Most of our bots are developed using VS Code, although we are going to launch a low code layer here very shortly. But most of it's there in VS Code, and there's a lot of goodness in there. But I thought you guys took an interesting approach. You took some of those citizen developer personas and paired them up with one of your developers, right? And walked them through, you know, here's an IDE, here's how to think about these things. Here's these concepts, what it is and what it means, right? And I remember Alicia from your team talking about once she had gone through that it then became more intuitive for her to build with the keyword-driven approach in VS Code than it was trying to drag and drop away to it in the previous low-code platform. And that was obviously, honestly, a learning for us, and I think a very a best practice that you guys put together on how do you bring people along on the journey that aren't developers by training, right?
Yeah, very much so. And I think the chat one or the Gen 1 tool is the right tool at the right time. And at a minimum, it helped people get in their mind of how to put things together to run as a process. And you got to the point then where, yeah, it was better. Frankly, it was better for me to actually write out the script and know how it goes than it was to move boxes around.
Oh, yep. Well, great. I know we're up on the hour here. I want to thank both of you guys again. Thank you. You guys took a leap of faith with us a long time ago, right? I was looking, Paul, it's actually about 2 years ago when we started having our first conversations, right? And you guys have made tremendous progress and helped us improve the tool, improve the open source community. So thank you for your partnership, and thank you for doing this session with us today.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining.